In this video, you'll learn all about GTO Wizard's Practice Mode. This includes how to create your own drills and how to use the trainer to improve your poker game. This is GTO Wizard Decoded. If we go to the dashboard and we go down to the drills option here, it's going to land us on this page where we have the option to create any drill we want ourselves. We also up here can click on GTO Wizard Drills, and this is going to show us all of the pre-made drills by GTO Wizard. They have these for different formats. So for example, if we click spin and go, these are all the drills that have been pre-made for spin and go. If we click cash, these are all the ones for cash. I'm going to show you how you can create your own drill. So we start by clicking create drill. We're going to be loaded here, and now we can customize anything we want. Let's pick a very specific spot just to show how you can do anything you want. So let's go to cash. Let's choose NL50. We'll have 100 big blind starting stack. This is fine. We'll pick this one and confirm. Okay, so we've chosen the format we want. Now we can choose whatever situation we like. So the situation I want to choose is having a button open, so raising 2.5. I want the small blind to fold, and I want the big blind to call. I'm not too bothered about the flop. What I want to do is practice my turn barrels after I decided to bet a flop small, because this can be a reasonably common scenario. So we'll have any flop. I don't need to change this. We'll have the big blind check, and we'll click the button betting small here. We'll have the big blind calling, and any turn will come, and we'll have the big blind to check, and now it's on buttons action. If I save this, and I can call it button 2 barrel opportunity, and we can put small C bet. And now this is going to be any chance I have on the button with a 2 barrel opportunity after a small C bet. I can save this, and then I can click on it. This will show us the stats for any time we've played it. We haven't played it yet, so no stats will show up. And I can start drill and check it's doing what I want to happen. So what do we see here? We've got 9.1 big blinds deep. So we will have raised pre-flop, and we're going to have a turn. If we click start training, 9.1 big blinds deep. Got a random hand, and we have c-bet the flop small, and we now have a turn barrel opportunity. You'll see we have quite a lot of different tools down on the left here as well as on the right. And I'm going to show you two different ways how you can approach using the trainer. So, firstly, we can choose whether we want all this information displaying on the right. The first way I think you can use to study with it, you can just hide all of this information and not open it, and then you're completely on your own with the decisions. This is more like drilling it as if you're in game, as you're not going to have all of this information in game, so it's more like simulating a real game. You can also do this by studying on more than one table at once, and you can customize if you just want to play this specific spot and not worry about, say, we bet, they call, and we play a river. If we just click street here, we would only be doing one street. Okay, and we can change the difficulty. So you see there's all these different betting options we have. This is because we're on standard mode from the left here, and this is going to give us all the betting options from how we've set it up. If we just want to make it a little bit more simpler, we could go to grouped, and it's now going to give us this bet small, medium, large, really big or check option instead of exact sizings. And if we wanted an even simpler approach, we could change it to simple, and this is just going to change it to check or bet. I think having standard is the way I would prefer to study with the tool, because we can bet all of these sizings if we want to in game. So I think it's good like this, but if you just want to get started, maybe grouped or simple would be more applicable for you. The input mode, what this does is instead of choosing an action, we could choose how often we think we should take an action. To see if we think we should sometimes bet or check a hand, we can see how close to that we are. So we can change that here. And this pause game after is when it's going to give us feedback on our decision. So if we have this on off, it's going to do it when at the end of the hand. If we changed it to mistake, anytime we took an action that the solver disagrees with, it would let us know that by giving us feedback on the screen. And if we choose action, it's going to give us feedback every single time we make an action, regardless of whether it was a mistake or not. So I think if you just want to come and simulate playing some hands, and that's your goal for your study session, just approaching it like this is completely fine, and it will give us a score as we go along. So, I'm not a cash game player, so I'm going to be winging this, but let's give it a go. So, we decided to bet small, button versus big blind, we got called, the turns are 7. I presume this 7 doesn't really change the range interactions too much, so I presume we'd be either going for a check or a pretty big bet when we do bet. So I can see it probably going either way with this hand mixing between a check or an over bet, I would presume. So I'll just click one. I'll go to grouped and I'll go for either bet large or over bet here, I guess. I'll go for over bet. It does take that option some of the time. Because it wasn't a mistake, it's fine with our play and we would move on and keep playing. If we wanted to see what it would do in that hand, we can see here, look, we took this action and we see it takes this 44% of the time by clicking the drop down here. We could click the drop down further here and it's going to show us all the actions it took at which frequency. It looks like I was right in my assumption of it either wants to check or go for a big bet, so that's pretty cool that I managed to figure that out. Okay, so we got given another hand here. Again, I think this is a relatively similar spot. All of our really strong hands on the flop are still really strong on the turn. Aces has lost some value, but apart from that, every king's really strong. Sets are now full houses, so I presume again this would be a spot that really likes to go big or check. Having the 4, I guess, blocks a few houses, but I presume it also has decent showdown value, so I think a check would probably seem logical here. And it seems like check is the most common option. So if you wanted to study like this, you could keep doing this. And you can easily get through a lot of hands. Again, if you wanted to see all the actions taken, you can click the drop down here and it's going to show you here with our ace 4. We had the king and we decided to check. And you see it's basically always checking. There is a second way I think you can approach using the trainer. And I think you can approach using the trainer to study very effectively, and this is because of all the information we can actually find down on this right panel here, which we can choose to display if we want. So we see we have this king 7 here, and look, it's showing us the whole strategy of the range. So we could very easily use this to study a spot in depth. We can even pop it out if we want to see it further, and we can see both ranges. And I'm a really big fan of being able to see both ranges side by side when we want to study. I think this is really how we can get to understand a spot in detail. What information do we have here? Well, it tells us our overall strategy. It also tells us who has which type of hands here. And it also has equity buckets, and I really like equity buckets. I think it's always good when we can compare the equity buckets of two people to really see what drives what sizing and what actions we want to take. And if we want to see, instead of just our decisions, our equity buckets, we can click the ranges here, and we're now going to see it for both players, which is really, really nice. This is we're almost doing the same thing we can do in the study tool browser feature here, but whilst playing with the bot. So anytime we get to a spot and we want to dive deeper, we always have this option whilst playing in the trainer, and I think that's really nice. You can also get directly to the study spot here by clicking this, and it would pop up in a new tab. We can also open this in a new window. So we can have this simultaneously up, for example, whilst we continue with our bot. We could make them both half of the screen, for example, right? And then we would be able to have both up on our screen simultaneously, for example. However you'd like it, however fits your screen best, right? So being able to pop this out is also really nice. Again, I really like this graph feature too. Again, this is on the study bit as well. But just fantastic for seeing how the equities line up. I think this can give us a super efficient way of studying in-depth things specifically. So, let me give you an example of how I would personally use this trainer to study something in my game. So as said, I'm not really a cash game player currently. I play spin and goes. So, let's do the same thing for some spin and go spots now. So if we go to drills, and we can create a drill we want again by going to my drills and clicking new. And this time I'm going to create one for spin and go. So, we can go here. We can change it to spin and go. I want it classic without ante, and I'm looking at when the spin first starts, so 25 big blinds deep. And I can click confirm here. So now we're at spin and go. What spot do I want to study? Well, let's stick with the button. I want the button to open, the small blind to fold, and the big blind to call. What do I want to know? Well, what I want to look at is turn 2 barrel opportunities again, this time for spin and goes. So I'll want the big blind to be checking. I'll want the button to have c-bet. I know from playing spin and goes that the most common c-bet the button's going to use is a small one. So again, I'll choose this one big blind bet. And I'll have the big blind call it. And we'll get to the turn and we'll have the barrel opportunity. So the same setup as with the cash game example. But this time I want to study a little bit more specific. Let's say I'm feeling really confident with how I'm playing my value from the button, but I want to concentrate on when I'm having weaker parts of my range. I can now click the hands section here, and instead of having any potential hand, I can choose only the hands I want to play. So, what hands am I curious about? Well, I don't really care about the pocket pairs, let's say. Okay, and I don't really care about all the really nice playable hands. I want to concentrate on the bottom hands the button will be opening. What is the kind of bottom hands the button will be opening? It's going to be easier to do this actually. The kind of worst hands the button opens in spin and go is going to be this offsuit 9x region. It's going to be some trashy ace-x. And actually we can throw in some low pocket pairs because sometimes we might want to be getting creative with these hands. So maybe I just click these hands and I'm playing only the bottomish part of my range. Maybe we can throw in some of the worst suited hands that the button might want to be playing as well. Some of these kind of holdings. So we can get really specific here by selecting only the hands we want to play. So I can add that in and I can save it. And I can call this button 2 barrel opportunity after 1 BBC bet. Okay, and as before, we can go and practice hands. We could also customize some other things there if we wanted to. We could have clicked the board button and we could have selected only specific board types. So I can actually create another one quickly and demonstrate that as well. So if maybe I didn't want to check just specific weak holdings, maybe I was interested in checking specific board structures. So we could again choose the spin and go. We could have 25 big blinds without antes again. And we could again have the same scenario here. You can see it really doesn't take long to set up. We've already got our c-bet opportunity again. Call. And then we've already got our turn barrel which we wanted. And this time we could click boards and we could go, okay, we're only interested in certain boards from the flop. So what boards might we be interested in? Well, let's say we only wanted to study when there was 2 Broadway cards. Let's say, for example. And we're not bothered about if it was monotone, flush draw, rainbow. We don't want it to be paired. So we want it to be when it's 2 Broadways, no paired. And then we can choose, so what do we want our highest card to be? Well, we want it to be either if it's 2 Broadway, it can't be lower than a 10, right? So it's got to be either ace, king, queen, or 10. What do we want our lowest card to be? Well, we want our lowest card to always be a 9 or lower, otherwise it's going to be 3 Broadway, right? And what do we want our middle card to be? Well, again, if it's 2 Broadway, we're always going to want this, right? We're always going to want there to be 2 cards between the ace to the 10 and just 1 card below. So we can save this, and this time we could call this button 2 barrel opportunity, and we could call it 2 Broadway structure, right? And again, after 1 big blind c-bet. So you can see you can create really specific drills in this trainer, and it really doesn't take long. So we can pick either of these, and I'll demonstrate to you how I would use it to study. So I'm going to go for this one. I'm going to go for the one where we selected the weaker hands. Again, we'll start our drill. And it's going to load up the spot for us. 6.5 big blinds deep here. Click start training again. And we see here we have 2 Broadway turn. And we have one of our weak holdings, we have our King 6, and we have a decision point. How would I use this to study? Well, I prefer the method where we can see the ranges. I like to see what's going on in different spots, how the ranges are interacting after that 1 big blind c-bet, so I can start to think what makes the most sense to me. So, I would open up the info, and I would go straight to the ranges section, and I would like to pop this out. If I go here, I'd like to get this up, and I'd like to be at the ranges. And first thing I do when studying is always I like to look at the graph. So, we know the big blind called a 1 big blind c-bet, so we expect that to have folded out a lot of their super trash region. This means that the big blind's equity shouldn't have a super ton of super low equity hands, and instead should be more condensed towards middling hands. We can see this from the graph, with the blue line being in the middle a lot, and if we drop down to equity buckets, we're going to see here, if we take the big blind that's on the left, the most common equity bucket is in 25 to 50 and 50 to 60. It's not in 0 to 25, which is to be expected. We also expect the button to have a sizable range advantage because the button's going to have hands like pocket aces, ace king, ace queen, which a big blind would raise versus a pre-flop bet, which makes sense. So we can expect the button, I would say, to be relatively aggressive here and leverage the fact that it's got all of these strong hands. We can also change up here whatever we want, so we can see the equity of hands, which is what I really like to use when studying. So I like to see, okay, I know I'm going to have value on these boards, but how good is my value? So on this board I'd go, how good is ace king? How comfortable does it feel to get all the chips in, let's say, or a very big bet? And we go and we check ace king and we see it's got very high equity. So this is going to imply ace king super crushing on this board. We can even go down to ace 2 to get an idea of how strong is any top pair on this board. And ace 2 has 81% equity, so any ace on this board is still absolutely crushing, so we're going to be able to value bet relatively wide. What might be our next kind of best value? It's going to be like kings and queens. These still have relatively large equity, so I'd expect us to be pretty aggressive on this turn and be able to barrel with a large sizing. So I've made my assumptions about the hand. I've tried to look at what's going on in terms of equity buckets, the equity graph, and how my value plays. And then I want to go and load the strategy tab and see if I was thinking along the right lines. So I can pop this up. I can click strategy and we can see what's going on. We see it is betting nearly half the time with a large size, and this is 5.5 into 6.5 big blinds, so this is a sizable bet. It's over 3/4, right? It's a big bet. And again, we can use this and we can see which type of hands it likes to do it with. Well, it's more than happy to start shoveling in lots of chips with top pair, which I expected because I checked the equities of top pairs and see the equity is really high, so this makes sense. We can see that it's even happy to bet this size with some second pairs. So quite a lot of them, right? All these king 10, queen 10, it's still just recognizing it's got enough value to go for it again. And because of this, it's going to be very aggressive with its no-made hands. And then we can check checks. What would make the most sense? Well, what would make the most sense would be hands like 7x, pocket 8s, pocket 9s, right? These would make the most sense to me anyway as checks. So we can see what's checking. It's a lot of low pair, which we expect, a lot of king highs, which also makes some sense, and a few no-made hands, but we're mainly bluffing the majority of our no-made hands. So we get a general idea of what's going on. And let's say we were struggling a little bit to figure out what the strategy could be, then we could always remember we can click the study this spot button and we can pop up and get to browsing with the study option again to see if you prefer this more clear. We can always pop this out while still having our spot up here. So we see we're betting very big and checking not very often. Like I said, pretty much any top pairs feeling very good. Same with most of our 10x, and the main check region is coming from these low pairs and hands like king, queen, king, jack, and 5x, which makes a lot of sense. So that's how I like to use the trainer. I really like to combine the trainer and the study together, and this way I think I can always get a really nice idea of what's going on in the spot. So here I'd go, okay, what did I have? I had king 6. I know that in general king highs are not going to make my best barrels on this board, but I know I can barrel quite aggressively with bluffs in general. I'm going to choose to check back a lot of my king x draws here, so I could barrel this, and we're going to want to go for a large sizing in general. And we can continue on. Here again, on the button, we're very often going to take some of our worst hands to barrel. And let's say midway through my session I decide, okay, I don't want to keep going in depth. Maybe I've spent 20-30 minutes going in depth looking at a few spots. I feel confident in what I've learned. Now I want to really put myself to the test. Well, if I'm feeling like that, now I can just close the information tab and not use it anymore. And now I can just drill the spots myself and see if I'm performing as well as I thought I'd done after studying the spot. So here I think it would make sense to be able to bet reasonably big again. This makes a good bluff. Unblock stuff like backdoor spades, king highs, ace highs, that could call the flop. So I think betting as a barrel here could make decent sense. Okay, what do we have here? So I just continue to drill hands like this, and whenever I make, say, a few mistakes in a row, that's when I would reopen up this panel here. So let's choose an option I think would make absolutely no sense here just to demonstrate this. So I'm going to choose overbet because I know for a fact this will be a very bad choice. So I'm going to click overbet. You see it doesn't like it. I could go to my history and go, oh, I've made a bad mistake there. I don't understand why. Okay, let me now go and study this spot and see if I can understand what was wrong in my thinking process there. So I'd open it up. I'd let it load. And I would go to my favourite tool like always, which is straight to the ranges tool, because I think this gives us the best idea of what's going on. I would look here and I'd go, okay, so the button still has a little bit more EV than the big blind. Okay, well, let's take a look at my graph. It looks like the big blind has a lot of very strong hands here, right? We look at the blue line and there's lots of hands very high up in the blue. Why is this? Well, let's go to our equity buckets and let's go to 90 to 100 and 80 to 90, and put both of these in, and we can see what's going on here. Oh yeah, the big blind has a lot of flushes. This makes sense, right? This is why we don't want to bet really big on this board. If I bet really big, I'm paying all of his value. What about hands that are about 50 to 60% equity? Well, a hand like King 10 here, which is a pair plus gut shot, is only having 50 to 60% equity for the big blind. So if I bet really big, it implies the big blind doesn't need to defend that often. If like halfway in his range is already having a second pair plus gut shot, if I bet really big, he's going to have a very, very easy time to continue versus my big bet. So this is why we're not going to want to bet big. The big blind just has too many very strong hands and lots of hands with equity that can comfortably call versus our bet. So we want to use and leverage the fact we're in position and not blast the pot with hands that don't crush equity super hard. We can also check here. Okay, we're playing in solver land here, but maybe we think things play a little bit differently in game. The first thing I always like to check when we're checking something like a barrel opportunity is I like to double check if the solver had donks. So to do this, I could click back here and go, Okay, was the solver donking? No, he wasn't, so I can take whatever the solver takes at face value here, in my opinion. Because I don't think players in my games will actually be donking here, so I think the ranges are going to be actually very similar to what GTO Wizard is quoting on the turn. So I think as long as we agree with the logic that GTO Wizard is taking for its decisions, then I think it's going to be a very good place to study. So we see it just doesn't want to bet very often on this turn, and when it mainly does, a small sizing. And this is because of the fact that Big Blind has so many good hands on this turn, and so many of our flop value. So what would a nice flop value hand be here? Let's say ace-9 of clubs. This would have made a good value hand on the flop. It's just not doing as well on the turn now. Again, we can change here to equity, and we can look at ace-9, and we can see that ace-9 of clubs only has 65.2% of equity, so just not doing as well on the turn. So this is how I would make the most out of the trainer tool. I would set up whatever drills I want to study a specific spot, and I would start my session off by diving deep with all the information down on the right here, using the ranges tab, checking how each other's ranges interact, and seeing if I can get a good understanding for the spot. I would then close this tab, and I would just keep drilling hands. So here we have a barrel opportunity, it's on an ace. We don't have a spade in our hand. I think this could in general make a pretty decent barrel. We're going to be able to go pretty aggressive on the ace. Let's just click bet large, for example. And I just keep playing hands, and when I make that big mistake, so for example I click that overbet on the flush board to deliberately make a mistake, I would then go, okay, why have I made that mistake, and try and see what the flaw in my thought process was, and if there's something I can learn to then understand that spot better. And then I'll just continue drilling away, and I think this is really good to get a lot of practice in, but also really develop that understanding on how ranges interact and why the solver chooses a certain size. I always like to ask the question why and try and solve that question if I can, and I think that's the key to getting the most out of a tool like GTO Wizard. So, if you have liked this video and you want to get yourself a GTO Wizard subscription, you can get 10% off your first purchase by clicking the link in the description. This also helps us to keep these videos free. You can also find the link on our homepage, r&bpoker.com, and on our Discord server. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys, and good luck on the tables, and see you in the next video.